Veterans Subcommittee. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We have one card called to the public. Ms. Summers, come on down. And I just really want to thank you for all your hard work in putting that conference together.
Thank you, Councilman. And that's really why, two reasons I'm here, and that's the first one, just to give you an update on the Anti-Graffiti Conference. I'm pleased that over 70 people participated in various portions or all of the day-and-a-half conference. We really identified some reoccurring themes and specific topics that we need to focus on. You know, graffiti doesn't respect borders, and so we plan to start also doing more coordination with other jurisdictions. Clegy met yesterday, and we're meeting with Chris Halleck and Linda Dodd next week. Councilman Nowakowski, I have to tell you, though, first of all, thanks for coming on Saturday. And second of all, that was a great story about your mom and baseball. We really appreciated it. And I in particular, because it explained, as I was listening, I thought, that's really what we need to do a better job of, is explaining to the people why it's not just graffiti and try and shift that perception of it. And second, on a personal note, please, at last month's meeting, there was a discussion of the Community Police Trust Initiative, and I'd like to suggest that there also needs to be a way for the public to thank officers when we have contact with the officers, rather than just waiting until a tragedy to show our appreciation and support. I do believe a thank you for a job well done builds trust and improves relationships. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Summers. Next, we have consent items 2 through 6.
Minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, approval of the minutes.
Move approval. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All righty. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. We were just leaving out the president of the police union. Mr. Ken, come on down.
Thanks.
You actually have some time donated. You have one.
We do. Donated time's a good thing. I probably will not use all that time, by the way. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. Again, for the record, Ken Crane, President of the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association. I'm here to talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is the police manpower and staffing crisis. PLE has had the opportunity to meet with every single council member, to include the mayor and the city manager, to talk about this issue over the last 2 months. First of all, thank you for your time and meeting with us, and it was much appreciated. I think we were able to lay out a unique perspective from our end of things on the police staffing crisis, to let you know what's some of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. We remain steadfast on 2 points: that we need to do aggressive recruiting out of state, especially from our military bases, to get the staffing that we need for the police department. Our average academy class is running roughly 25, some classes a little lower, some a little more, but we need to increase sizes of academy classes going forward to approximately 50 recruits a month for at least 10 months out of the year. That's a big leap. It's a stretch. I think we can do it. There's unique workarounds that we can do to achieve it, to get these numbers through the pipeline. I've talked to people in recruiting and at the academy, but it can be done. PLE remains steadfast in our assertion that we need to hire till we achieve a ratio of 2.5 officers per 1,000 citizens in the city of Phoenix. That comes out to 4,200 cops on our population. I won't go into all the details. We've met with each one of you individually to explain how we arrive at those numbers. The bottom line is that number for a city the size of Phoenix, with our geographic footprint and our population, is not an unreasonable number. There are a lot of cities that staff way higher than that, some up to 4 or over 4 per 1,000. I want to talk real quick about the crime rate. Here's some questions we need to ask ourselves and seek answers to. Is the crime rate going up, and what are the violent crime rates? What's the trend on homicides in our city? Coincidentally, there's an Arizona Republic investigative article, March 6th, that just came out, that said the homicides in Phoenix went from 113 in 2015 to 149 in 2016, an increase of 32% over a year. So there's the answer to that question for you. How much manpower and overtime is consumed by something like a serial shooter investigation? And what happens if you get 2 serial crimes going at the same time in the city? It's happened before. it could happen again. Would concerted terrorist attacks in multiple locations in the city saturate and overwhelm our public safety infrastructure? Let me answer that one for you. Yes. Based on our current staffing, we would be screwed. I want to talk about some trend lines. For available first responders, people that answer when citizens call 911 is heading down. In 2009, we had 1,342 first responders. September 2015, that was down to 859 out on the street. Same time frame, the average squad sizes, the number to given to patrol a specific area dropped to 6.5 officers per squad, half the typical size from January of 2009. And I will tell you, I get calls from officers. There are some squads that still go out understaffed, 5 members on a squad. Sometimes if things are really bad, maybe 4, but 6.5 is the average. So what's happening to response times? That's the single most important measure for a citizen to see how their city is doing, is a response time to a true emergency. On Priority 1 calls, we know this, and Chief Williams even confirmed it at a January citizens meeting, where she explained that our average response time on Priority 1 emergency calls is 7 minutes. Now here's what that means. That's an average. So what that means is there's a lot of calls where it's taken 10 or 12 minutes to get to a citizen during an armed robbery, a home invasion, a break-in, a sexual assault in progress. I've even had officers tell me it's taken them 20 minutes to get to a Priority 1 hot call. Now, we can dismiss those as outliers, and that's okay until it's you or your family member, and then outlier doesn't mean a thing. So, let me talk real quick about the rebid. The transfers are complete, but it's a Band-Aid fix, and we all know it. Our management knows it too. They're trying to do what they can with what they have. But even with the rebid transfers, we didn't make it to the, quote, crisis staffing levels of 1,096. Officers are still calling us about running short on manpower. Had one officer complain, told me that she's got to drive 20 minutes from one side of the squad area to the other to answer a call, then turn around and answer another call back down here and drive another 20 minutes. Our detectives, and this is crucial, they are drowning in caseload and losing ability to follow up on critical cases. We are losing prosecutions on cases. Citizens are losing victims' rights. What do? We got a detective details to go beef up patrol. We robbed Peter to pay Paul. So, I'm going to talk real quick about recruitment. If we want to get to Ed Zucker's magic number of 3125, we're roughly down 400 to 500 officers. That's the equivalent of staffing 2 precincts. But if we hire to the level of 4,200, the 2.5 number per thousand, we need to hire about 1,400. So if we subtract the number of officers who've left the department through retirements, how many have we really hired, and what's the total number? Since Plea first spoke out about the manpower crisis last December, I am told some funds were freed up for recruiting to do 20 to 25,000 to do out-of-state recruiting. I know they recently did a recruiting trip to Camp Pendleton in California, so that's a step in the right direction. But we need to seek people with already trained military backgrounds. Are we reaching out to military bases or out-of-state colleges with criminal justice programs? And are we aggressively pursuing lateral candidates from other agencies, whether it be in-state or out-of-state? These are all things we have to do. I'm going to wrap up by saying this. I'll talk about misplaced priorities. Here's some questions we need to ask. Why, when facing a manpower crisis on the police department, is the city giving serious consideration to spending millions renovating the Talking Stick Suns Arena? How can city government lament how much it costs to hire cops, but in the same breath talk about using taxpayer money for upgrades to pro sports venues? The city likes to complain about rising pension costs. Well, consider this. The average annual salary of a Phoenix police officer is about $57,000 a year, give or take. The average pay for a first-year NBA player, $543,000. And a lot of them get a lot more money than that for first-year pay. So here's my point. If cops were paid NBA salaries, we wouldn't need pensions. Pro sports athletes entertain us. Cops spend their careers running to gunfights and on a daily basis, taking the risks needed to keep the citizens safe. By not fixing this expeditiously, our cops are hanging out and our citizens are hanging out. So I'm just going to leave you with this. This problem's not going away, and neither are we. We are going to stay on this aggressively until it's fixed. My hope, our hope, is that the Public Safety Subcommittee and the rest of council can come together and make the hard decisions that it's going to take. You got to find a way to come up with the money to fix this. Okay, and we've spoken to all of you individually on this. We've had some very candid conversations, and again, we do appreciate the time. You know, we want to work together, but we got to get it fixed. So we're going to stay on this, and that's all we've got. Unless there's any questions of me.
You know, there's actually 23 seconds left. You want to use them?
Okay.
Thank you so much. With that, there's some great comments on item number 9. If you're going to stick around to the police hiring and recruitment plan. During public comment, we can actually ask you questions, but during item number 9, we could actually ask you some of the questions about recruitment and stuff. With that, we're on consent items 2 through 6.
Move approval. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It passes. Now we're on item number 7 through 11. It's possible discussion. Oh, no, we're actually on item number 7. I'm sorry about that. We have the judge, our presiding judge up here.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. It's actually really exciting for me to be here today to talk to you about the behavioral health court we've created over in the court. When you gave me the honor of appointing me a little over 20 months ago now, one of the strategic objectives I outlined for you as important for the court was going to be the development of a true, real, and robust behavioral health court. And I'm here today pleased to tell you that due to the extraordinary efforts of both the staff at the court, the prosecutor's office, the public defender's office, and other partners that we've brought for you to hear from. We've done so. It's now been operational for a year. It's been quite a success. We'd like to tell you about it, and I'm going to turn the time over to Judge Michael Hinsey, who anchors the court for us and does a phenomenal job at it.
I apologize. I appreciate you donating that time for us, Councilwoman. With respect to the goals that the court have, once we developed, as you can see, it's to improve the outcomes and reduce recidivism. We've also been able to divert people from incarceration and save on jail costs. We have an effective use of very limited mental health resources, and we increase our access to treatment with our partnership and collaborating with the various entities. And ultimately, what we do is improve the quality of life for individuals that are going through. With respect to this matter, I'm going to turn it over now to Shelley Curran with.
Good morning. My name is Shelley Curran, and I'm the Court Services Administrator with Mercy Maricopa Integrated Care. We are the Regional Behavioral Health Authority responsible for the citizens of Maricopa County in regards to behavioral health for the Medicaid population and substance abuse treatment. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the partnerships that are required to bring a court like this together. So we have many different partners that without every single one of these, the court would not be able to function. And so we have the public defender's office, the prosecutor's office, the REBA, Hope Lives, which is one of our providers who will be speaking in just a moment, Correctional Health Services with Maricopa County, and the Human Services Department with the City of Phoenix. And all of these agencies play an integral role in making sure that our citizens have the ability to make it through the court system and to be able to identify what it was that brought them into contact with law enforcement and what it was that brought them into contact with the court, so that we can put a plan in place to help them get back on their feet and get out to be productive citizens again. So it really has taken the effort of all of these agencies to be able to bring this court together.
See if I have it down. Okay. Good morning to all of you, and hello. My name is Christopher Gonzalez, and I am the CEO for Hope Lives, which is a multicultural community agency providing forensic peer supports to our community members that are involved in the criminal justice system. So we're here today to share a success story from our Phoenix Behavioral Health Court. So the champion that we want to share today began attending Hope Lives in July of 2013. And approximately 6 months later, in January of 2014, this community member made an informed choice to not continue services. Later that year, in October of 2014, this individual had several run-ins with law enforcement and with the legal system and obtained multiple charges. So when we first met this community member, she was living in a halfway house. And this person had no income, no way to pay for her expenses, and the halfway house had allowed for her to stay on a promise to pay. So still not having any income or way to pay for her expenses and exhausting the length of stay with this halfway house, this individual needed to move in with her sister. And through the relationship with her sister, it became an unhealthy situation and put a lot of strain on that relationship, which then ushered a period of self-destructive behavior for this individual, which led her to leave that situation and moved in with her mother at that time, who had many challenges in understanding and dealing with her daughter's mental illness. And through this unhealthy relationship and the challenges that both were experiencing, she started to experience cycles of anger and depression, which led this person to a brief hospital stay at the state hospital. So after leaving the state hospital, this individual entered a second halfway house where this person thrives today. And during her involvement at the halfway house, she was able to apply for and obtain income through Social Security and food benefits with Access DES. Currently at this time, through her involvement with the Phoenix Behavioral Health Court and our community of care is really how we like to reflect, both with the clinical and the community supports as well. This person is now medication compliant. This person regularly and voluntarily participates with her forensic, her FACT team at her clinic, as well as her forensic peer support in the community care side. During this time, she has completed all of her responsibilities with the Phoenix Behavioral Health Court and continues to voluntarily and encouraging herself to maintain involvement in those supports, both with the clinical supports as well as the community supports. So this person really is taking the opportunity to allow herself finally to participate in various pro-social activities, where this person can learn how to create a self-support network, friends, coworkers, other types of activities, clean and sober, both free from drugs and alcohol. And that's a huge feat within itself to be able to participate pro-socially that way. She continues to involve herself in independent living skills growth by attending budgeting and cooking classes at Hope Lives. To help her with those wraparound supports and to encourage the abilities that she now obtains, she voluntarily participates in independent living skill support groups within her clinical setting as well. So with her model of recovery and really learning those interpersonal communication skills, learning how to first communicate with herself before we can effectively communicate with others, she's been modeling this behavior to her other residents and other people of supports that she's met, in which now, through that encouragement, they are also attending to increase their independent living skills and to become that meaningful community member. So she'd like for us to share with you today that she is 5 months clean and sober, which is a huge feat for most. She now has aspirations of living independently in the community of her choice by obtaining her own apartment. And she would also like for us to share with you today for one of the first times that she can say, I'm happy. And I have no intentions of returning to the criminal justice environment nor to jail or prison. So thank you for allowing us to share just one of many success stories within our community of care, within the Phoenix Behavioral Health Court, and within Hope Lives.
If I could say just a few brief words in conclusion and then open it up for questions. That was one story that I think is heartening to hear. As was noted, it is one of many. Since we began the court in January of 2016, over 800 people have been through behavioral health court. And as I won't regurgitate what's in the CCR, but you can see that it's an extraordinarily high success rate for people who stick with the program and complete that program of treatment, which I will tell you is not easy. This is by no means a court in which people are getting some sort of easy break because of their condition. What they are getting is unique help with the unique challenges that they face in that system. As I have said to you on other occasions, because it's very consistent with some of the other initiatives we're working on, fair justice and the ability to do this is smart justice. At the end of the day, if we can actually connect people with the services that allow them to deal with some of the underlying structural issues that have brought them in contact with the criminal justice system, we're all better off. Not only are they extraordinarily better off, but in a time of very limited resources, particularly with the police that they currently have, every one of these people that we can help enough that they're not coming into that contact again is a great thing. Last thing I'll say is I would be remiss if I did not publicly thank the people who have put extraordinary efforts into designing, implementing, and ensuring the success of this court. Judge Hinsey has done extraordinary work, and I am pleased and can unabashedly say that there is no court in the state of Arizona that has a higher level of professionalism or understanding of the way that mental health issues affect the criminal justice system than Judge Hinsey. My staff at the court, who did the heavy lifting on creating the court, Ms. Robin Brown and Mr. Keith Kaplan, who are here today, and our partners. I can't say enough about the important work that the Regional Behavioral Health Authority has been and that Hope Lives and others have provided. The Public Defender's Office, specifically Tara Fuller, Nora Greer, Lynn Gibson, all of whom put in extraordinary hours in what they do, and the Prosecutor's Office, and Ms. Sarah DeYoung. Again, those are the individuals who have created this success and made it what it is. I'm proud to be here to talk about the work they've done and would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions from my colleagues?
I have
Councilmember Williams?
Thank you. It was a real privilege to come over and observe for a while. I will tell you, the judge is very firm, but very compassionate and well respected. You could tell by the people going through there. It was very, very impressive. But I'm curious. How do people get referred to this?
One of the things that we did was, when we first began, we did an administrative order for data sharing. And so on a daily basis, we have a download that feeds with the REBA directly. We're able to match with a date of birth, a name, and the last four of a social security for a person that has SMI services through the state agencies and the designations. So we've done that. We identify the individuals, and that's one area that we have. Then we have another area where people are designated general mental health. And once we have the general mental health designation, we then can turn and see if the person will qualify for further evaluation and further services. We also have a lot of judges and prosecutors in defense that refer cases to us for consideration. And the team meets and we look at it and say, can we provide the service for that individual, holding them accountable, yet providing services to them to be successful. So there's a lot of ways we can pull in cases. We then also have partnered with some other individuals, such as looking at cases where the Maricopa County Public Fiduciary's Office is working with the individual as a ward, and that's helped us tremendously, especially when it comes to financial obligations. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I think another way of referral is through our MROPE or MRO. I never say it correctly, but I know it very passionate. I know it very well because of working with the officers within the community. And I work closely with them in saying, okay, I haven't seen so-and-so, what's going on, and usually the officers are able to give me an update as to this is where they're at in the process. They took services, now we're working with the courts, or it also could be the opposite way of they haven't taken services, now it's in the courts, and now we're putting them, it's going to go through the behavioral courts process to see if then they'll take services. So I see the effects within the neighborhoods. So it is a great way of looking at a person in a very holistic manner, and also putting programs and systems together to also be able to help that individual to be to move forward and understand what is happening with them. If it's a more behavioral mental health, and providing or getting them to the medication that is needed in order to stabilize them. So I want to just commend you, and I also want to commend those officers that are part of the program, the MRO program, because they do that daily, and I see the effects within the neighborhoods, and also constituents see it. And so I think it's great that we're all working as a system and collaborating.
Vice Mayor, you're correct. With respect to this matter, the crisis intervention training that REBA's been working on for years in conjunction with the police departments has been very successful. The MRO program, in conjunction with the prosecutor, and Sarah's here today. If there's any questions, I'm sure she'll run up here. But with respect to this matter, those are being addressed, and we've even taken it to the next level, which I'm sure the presiding judge will talk about, which is that we're intervening into the actual jail court calendars.
Well, thank you.
Any other comments? With that, just thank you so much, and coming up with innovative ways of running our court system. Thank you. So we're on item number 8.
Morning. I'm Blair Johnson. I'm the city's HR director, and I'm joined this morning by Cindy Bezery, our assistant HR director. What we wanted to provide for you was an overview of the Civil Service Board. Essentially, there's kind of two key areas that we would like to cover, although I wanted to give you a little bit of background as we enter this topic. So just to kind of provide that insight for you. So we have a 5-member Civil Service Board, which has a chair, and as you see, is consisted of individuals based upon political party affiliation, and there's a reference with regard to how we fill positions, which comes through the mayor and council, and monthly board meetings for the Civil Service Board, Both Cindy as well as now Rhonda Wilson have served in the executive secretary role. Rhonda Wilson, we're doing some cross-training with staff, wasn't able to join us today, but they both work under my direction as the personnel official for the city, and then the board also has a separate attorney. So again, we just wanted to give you a little bit of background in terms, all the seats on the board have been filled now. We filled the last one in 2016 with Donna McHenry. And have really had, I think, some good success, as you'll hear, in terms of some of our results for the board. But just some background for you. In terms of the Civil Service Board and kind of background about why these things are established in organizations, the city has established a merit system which essentially governs the personnel administration, hiring, promotions, disciplinary actions, those kinds of things. That's very common in government organizations to make sure that we're using performance basis for those kinds of personnel actions. The Civil Service Board is very focused, as we are as an employer, on due process and just cause. So our concerns with employee rights, the Civil Service Board essentially is a problem-solving step for an employee. If there's disciplinary action taken, that's their opportunity to have those situations looked to by a neutral party. And again, it's an important part of this dispute resolution process. So again, just giving you some background. And also just in terms of kind of which things are in the scope for the Civil Service Board. So the Civil Service Board hears items that involve demotions, discharges, or suspensions. So those, again, are not issues that are necessarily at the lower level of disciplinary actions, but they're going to involve suspensions and higher levels of disciplinary actions. This body, City Council, worked with us, I believe, in 2015 to really increase our number of hearing officers from 2 to 4. So we had, again, a little bit larger panel to work from, and in terms of being responsive. And as you can see, hearing officers conduct hearings, and the decisions of the Civil Service Board are then final and binding. So again, we just wanted to give you some of that background. So with that behind us, wanted to also just reinforce, as we said, just cause, due process, progressive discipline. These are concepts that the city as an employer and certainly the Civil Service Board is concerned with. And this essentially shows some steps in the progressive disciplinary process that I just wanted to share with you when it comes to disciplinary actions. So we oftentimes get questions about kind of level of review and consistency, and so I think this is important to cover. So the Human Resources Department has responsibility for reviewing discipline within terms of comparability. Our concern is making sure that like situations are handled in like ways. We're also obviously concerned with compliance with policy and law, collective bargaining agreements, and so again, that when discipline is taken, that is our concern. We also work closely with our partners in the law department to make sure that if we are taking disciplinary action, suspension, demotion, or discharge, that we're doing so in a way that is legally compliant with those expectations. A second level or an independent review by the department head is also conducted, and then a final review by HR leadership. So what I just intend to kind of convey to you in that part is there's a lot that obviously goes into the seriousness of taking disciplinary action. Sometimes it is appropriate in the course of employment, obviously, but we do put a lot of time and focus into making sure that we're acting in a way that respects just cause, due process, and progressive discipline. An employee, again, that faces suspension or a higher level of discipline would then have the opportunity to appeal to the Civil Service Board. Again, we mentioned earlier, hearing officers are used in that process, and then the Civil Service Board makes recommendations and reviews that information. So again, just kind of to explain the process and kind of the flow of the Civil Service Board. So with that history behind us, we thought we probably wanted to get you some more specific information. Let me see here, there we go. So I will try and make this graph a little bit easier to understand, but let me just kind of orient you to it. One of the things we wanted to do is provide you with some trending around how our civil service actions from 2008 up until really 2016. We've got just a couple of things in calendar year 2017 year to date that are underway. And the concern oftentimes for subcommittees and city council and leadership is, are the actions that we're taking sound actions? Are they upheld or sustained? Or are they modified by the Civil Service Board, or how are they being handled? And also just in general, how many issues are you seeing come before the board? So What this essentially, just to orient you, the red line at the bottom of the graph are the items that would come before Civil Service Board that would be modified. The Civil Service Board in some way would change the original recommended disciplinary action or action taken. The green line is the items that are upheld, and then the black line is the total issues. And let me just get away from the numbers and graphs and tell you what the story is, just in terms of the specifics. So anticipating what some of your questions might be, from 2014, 15, and 16, we see a pretty strong number in terms of the items that are upheld. So for example, in 2014, 53% of the items that were that came before the board were upheld. We did have a little bit of a decrease because we had a number of issues in 2015 that were settled or withdrawn. And question you might have would be, why would something be settled or withdrawn? Sometimes maybe the case isn't as strong from the employee's perspective or the employer's perspective. And so sometimes the case will be withdrawn. Also, sometimes settlement makes sense. Settlement makes sense in the sense of perhaps the discipline may make sense, but perhaps the term of it being in an active file might be modified. So there could be some middle ground or some hybrid to the discipline in which we meet as parties and talk about some type of settlement. Yes, ma'am.
Could you explain that further? What
Certainly.
do you mean?
So, for example, I'm going to give you an example of a settlement situation. Let's say that someone received a suspension, and the suspension is going to remain in the employee's active file for 5 years. A settlement could be that we're going to uphold the suspension, we're going to sustain that, but perhaps that discipline notice remains in the file for 3 years instead of 5 years. You could through a settlement agreement, we could come up with that modification of the time frame. The disciplinary document does not leave the city's records, but it moves from an active file to an inactive or a passive file in terms of the information. So we sometimes see those in settlements in terms of how long is something retained in an employee file. We also see sometimes settlements that might change the level of discipline, the number of hours suspended, or the level of discipline taken. Does that help? Yeah, thank you.
Mayor has a question.
Please, of
Claire,
course,
I have
yes.
a question about
Yes,
the
ma'am.
file. How critical is the personnel file?
I mean, it's the official employee record, certainly in terms of, kind of having a record of the employee's history with the employer and, a collection of pay actions and disciplinary actions and other important key personnel actions.
So, and the reason I'm bringing this up because I deal with personnel files.
Yes, yes.
So, my question is, who requests to read the personnel file?
Who requests to read it?
Well, who requests? Who's
has access
eligible?
to it?
Yeah, who has access and who's eligible to
Sure.
read the personnel file? So if I choose to go to a different city to apply for a different position, who has access?
You want to cover what your process has been here historically? Because I know what it's been recently, but I want to make sure I'm giving you historical information as well.
Good morning. In this particular public sector, anyone who makes a request to review the public records can review them. So the personnel file and the official personnel file here in this city is a critical document because we do get requests from attorneys, from employers, from employers. It's an even more critical file for our police officers and people who are doing actions in our courts because it could be an indication of a background thing that somebody would want to bring forward. So we are protective of those files, and we want to make sure that the documents in those files are completely accurate.
So what I'm hearing is somebody does a public records request, they have access to that file. So anybody has access to the file.
And one of the things we always want to make sure is that, in particular, we're always very sensitive to making sure that employees also have the opportunity to come and look at their own file. Oftentimes, those are questions, and that's, in some cases, and in some states, that's required. In our case, we certainly philosophically believe in making that available to employees as they come by and they want to see what's in their employee file.
And the
But
reason
yes.
why I'm asking that is because of a settlement, and now I can put
Sure.
the two together and
Absolutely.
understand why that is critical to the appeal process.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So again, one of the things, just looking at this next slide and kind of helping these numbers tell you something in terms of trends. So overall, what we see when we look at 2015 forward, so looking at recent years, understanding that we've had some changes in key leadership positions at the city, and we've certainly, under Cindy's leadership initially, and then frankly, with the things that we've done this past year since I joined the organization, we think we've got some exciting things to share with you in terms of trends for civil service. Overall, the number of claims are decreasing. So you'll see that since 2014, we had a little bit of a spike in 15, but we're really on the downward trend. And so that's one trend that we see in terms of the numbers. Fewer cases are being modified in recent years. So again, we're seeing 8 cases in 2014, 11 in 2015, less than half, down to 4 in 2016, and we'll tell you about why we think that's happening in just one moment. And then to Councilwoman Williams' point, we do have more issues that are being settled, and in some cases being withdrawn, and again, the Vice Mayor, prior to coming before the board. So I think that's a healthy thing. It's part of the process, but we again wanted to show you some of those trends. Okay. So enough with some of the numbers, but we wanted to give you some other information about, I know one question that predates me that Cindy really worked on very hard and we've continued is to make sure that we have opportunities, and you oftentimes ask us about citizen involvement, and that's a question we get. So certainly the Civil Service Board in and of itself is obviously one of the easiest ways that a citizen can be involved in this process. While it is internally a problem-solving process, those members of the Civil Service Board through council and through the mayor's office are obviously important ways for citizens to be involved. Our colleagues in the police department also have internally processes involving discipline review and use of force boards, and they are very engaged and involved in that process. And then much like this meeting and most of our meetings, we have a call to the public at each of our monthly meetings. So there are opportunities, obviously, for members of citizens and to address the board, not necessarily specifically on cases in particular, but again, to share any comments, observations, or concerns with us. Lastly, I will share with you, and then we'll certainly answer some questions, and just want to be sensitive to time today. One of the questions that I know we've focused on is making sure we have training, we have some policies, and we have some good procedures in place. And that, I think, was, frankly, when Cindy came to the organization, it was one of the things that she identified as a priority, and I agree with that priority in wanting to do some more with that. So first and foremost, we completed training of all 4 hearing officers in 2016. We wanted to make sure that those individuals were operating with kind of the same information, with a good foundation of understanding the process, and we're, as you'll see, kind of further developing that training now into some further policies and procedures. We also felt pretty strongly about making sure that we had good bench strength with the staff. So we have 6 staff in human resources, again, who have worked with Cindy and myself and other members to make sure that we have that cross-training in place. We want to make sure that civil service matters can be heard timely, it can be smooth, and we have good cross-training. Probably most importantly for your interests, we have developed policies and procedures. Cindy really worked with us to develop those in June of 2016. Starting in December, we held a number of stakeholder meetings with individuals from any angle of involvement with civil service. It could be employee side, labor union, it could be our own attorneys in the law department, and any folks involved with civil service or human resources. And we do have a final meeting planned April 10th. Was that the date? April 13th, excuse me, April 13th. That April meeting is our regular civil service meeting, but it will be another opportunity for us to get some feedback on those policies and procedures. And our goal really has been to have those stakeholder sessions through December and through the first quarter of 2017. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to pilot those rules for several months and then come back to the full council in late 2017. That gives us, we think, an opportunity to kind of use the rules in practice and make sure that they're operating as intended, and then we can come back to you with more of a finished product. But that provides some structure. So with that, I will certainly conclude. I'm not sure if Cindy wants to cover anything else, but we're happy to answer questions for you. I think the report is that we see the right trend in terms of numbers. We're investing in some training in terms of some structure and policies and procedures to help the process operate smoothly. But thank you.
Councilmember Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you give us some examples of what you're talking about? What you're improving and
Sure,
plan
some of the
to bring
rules,
back to
absolutely. I'll
us?
let Cindy, who's got more detail on that.
And maybe name some of your biggest challenges or more most frequent flyers or whatever?
Spending approximately 12 hours of my life with multiple attorneys has probably been the greatest challenge in accomplishing the policies and procedures. The board's approach to the policies and procedures were to look at the personnel rules that allowed the board to enact their own rules, promulgate their own rules, and say if we needed to revise them, what would we do? And we took some initial feedback from all of our stakeholders in 2015. We then tried to capture that in the rules so that it brought clarity to what the purpose was, clarity to how a hearing should take place, clarity to the authority of a hearing officer, what that report should look like from the hearing officer, how long should the process take. And through multiple stakeholder meetings, we've taken written feedback from all of the advocates and all the stakeholders on all the rules. I wouldn't say everybody agrees with everything, but I think we have a good set of rules that we can pilot and work from that allow for a fair process, that allow for very clear direction to our hearing officers about the expectations for conducting the hearing and replying to the hearing, and clear rules for the board on listening to those recommendations and taking their motions to final action. There have been a lot of meetings. There have been several executive sessions with the board with their attorney. I can't talk about those, but I can tell you the engagement between the board and the attorney is probably at the highest level it's been in years, which is very, very good. So credit to Chairman Bruce Meyerson. He has shepherded this process and really taken it very personally, and I think is looking forward to piloting it and being able to answer questions from any of you about how this board works. And the board's very engaged at this point, so it's exciting. It's a very exciting time.
Any other questions? Councilmember Gallego?
I want to thank you for taking this on. I think about 2 years ago, there was a lot of conversation about, including from board members, where they didn't have the structure they needed and felt like that put them in a bad place, and it wasn't clear how much evidence should they hear, under what circumstances, how do you make sure that the Civil Service Board gets all the information it needs, but that it's not totally duplicative and we don't have 3 levels of process where we do the same evidence over and over again. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the pilot goes and hearing more from all of the stakeholders. And just again, if people in the community or stakeholders have more information, April 13th is when they should.
Posted meetings, we'll have it posted for the Civil Service Board, the regular meeting, correct?
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you all.
Any other questions? I have a couple questions. So the makeup of the board is actually 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, and an independent, right?
Let me just verify, because so Mr. Meyerson is a Democrat, Mr. Lord is a Democrat, Ms. McHenry is a Democrat, Mr. Stapley is a Republican, is my understanding.
Now, is there term limits or?
Yes, there are term limits, and those terms are renewed by the mayor's office, and he's looking at some of those now.
And what are the term limits for?
2 and 3 year, it depends on the appointment. I can't quote them for you, but we can get that for you.
It's staggered, is that right? So that yeah, exactly.
It's staggered.
And basically, who appoints the individuals to the, I know that it comes to the council for final approval, but who's out there recruiting and who's actually the one that appoints these individuals?
As a staff member to the board, we work with the mayor's office when we have an opening, and the mayor's office conducts that recruitment and reviews those resumes.
And then one of the things I'm noticing is the diversity of the board. There's not that much diversity, especially when it comes to Hispanics that make up 40% of the population. I don't see a member of Latino descent on there, is there?
There is not at this time.
So that would be something we'd bring up to the mayor to.
I would recommend that, sir.
Alrighty. And then if you can go back to this chart right here. And then you have hearing officers. Who appoints those hearing officers?
Hearing officers are appointed by the Civil Service Board, just like they hire their own attorney. There was a request for proposal process that was approved to go through by this body, and then final contracts were also approved by the mayor and council for those 4 hearing officers.
Then basically the hearing officers actually hear the case before the Civil Service Board actually reviews it, right?
That's correct.
Did they deny the hearing officer's recommendation, or?
Civil Service Board has the final authority to rule on the recommendation of the hearing officer, so they can accept it, they can modify it, or they can reject it totally.
Already. Those are all the questions that I have, Councilman, Vice Mayor.
I have one more on page 5. Obviously, there's a whole process from the HR perspective. And then if whatever the outcome is, if they want to, they then appeal it to the civil service?
That is correct.
And what happens in the blue? Because is that where the
That's essentially the decision point. If an employee receives disciplinary action, then they retain the option. Their appeal option to that disciplinary action is to take it before the Civil Service Board if it's a demotion or a higher level of discipline.
okay, so in the blue is where they put the official appeal?
Yeah, exactly. There's a process in terms of timing and filing that concern.
Okay. Because
Yes.
I was just wondering where then, is that also the process of where they can withdraw or their settlement?
You know, a withdrawal or a settlement can happen really at any point in the process. It tends to happen a little bit further along, kind of later in the process. Again, as more information kind of becomes available, but you really can see it happen at any point. Oftentimes, as people kind of understand the employer's perspective and the employee's perspective, and they understand the other side, they may assess the strength of their case and they may potentially withdraw or settle. But we tend to see that happen a little bit later along this timeline, correct?
Civil Service Board choose not to hear the appeal.
No, the weight of the obligation is by ordinance in this city. So that would be a mayor and council ordinance that's passed that says one must hear the appeal.
Okay, so they no matter what, they have to hear the appeal.
Yes, ma'am.
Goes forward, yeah.
Thank you.
And then another final question is, from 2014 to 2015,
Yes, sir.
that spike of 17 to 61, is there any certain
You know,
reason for that?
I
or-
can offer some anecdotal information. Cindy may certainly want to complement that as well. I mean, I think sometimes what you see is things that happened in late 2013 may have then been, or excuse me, 2014 may have been heard in 2015. I think we had some some key staffing changes in some departments in terms of disciplinary actions. There was, I think, a lot more civil service issues in the police department during that time. And I'm not sure if you have any other history beyond that, but it was really a kind of a lag in terms of that change and seeing some of those issues that came up that were then heard before the board in 2015.
The only thing I would add, I think it's important to note that in some cases, a final discipline may take as long as 12 to 18 months to be rendered. So what you see as an appeal in 1 year could have been a disciplinary investigation that started 18 months prior to that.
A little bit of a lag time there.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for the update.
Time.
Now we're going to be on item number 9, talking about police hiring and replacement plan. Welcome, Chief.
Morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, for allowing us the opportunity to share with you some of the strides that we're making in regards to hiring. Also, a big thank you to city management, to mayor and council and BNR for really working through some of the challenges that we're having and providing resources for us to do this. So I have Commander Lee ready to go.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Mayor, and members of the Public Safety Subcommittee. The Phoenix Police Department continues to aggressively continue on its pursuit to hire new police recruits from across all demographic segments of our community. Using this approach, we found it effective in ensuring that the officers that are hired are truly reflective of the communities that they will ultimately serve. The police department was asked to provide an overview of the 3-year hiring and replacement plan, which carries us through fiscal year 2019-2020. This is the plan in conjunction with the one published by BNR that we are currently utilizing. It's important to note, though, that on this, these numbers do not reflect the attrition carryover numbers, which continue to be monitored on a monthly basis by Budget and Research.
Does that also include what we're hiring this year? Because this looks like the next 3 years.
Correct. Yeah, this is for the next 3 years. We continue to hire throughout the close of this fiscal year. We still have 3 more academy classes left to close out this fiscal year. And we're anticipating that by the close of this fiscal year, we will be somewhere in the area of about 296 officers hired by the end of that fiscal year.
So, 2017, 2018, is it the 259 we will be hiring by the end of 2018?
Those are the initial budgeted positions allocated by BNR. However, we do expect that as the year progresses, we will have additional numbers that will be added to that, and that's based on the factoring of the attrition carryover numbers that we have to account for throughout. So month to month, BNR will come back and tell us if there's additional positions that they're going to give us in order to help compensate for what we lose each month in attrition.
So from our freeze to now, how many have we hired?
So far to date, we've hired 520 officers.
How many have we lost from that time?
As far as the total number lost, I don't have that combined number in front of me. We typically tend to lose anywhere from 15 to as high as 18 officers per month. And last year, this year was actually 18 per month, so it was one of our highest years.
I guess my question is from the freeze to now, how many positions have we lost? Because I'm sure we have not gained. I know we've hired 520, but I'm sure
Right.
there's more positions lost than 520.
Yeah, I don't have the exact
Okay.
number in front of me. I can certainly get that for you. But I don't have the total number lost. These are just the ones that we've hired
Okay.
at the 520.
And then my second question, in this hiring, does this include those that are retired, that are retiring? Are we filling those positions?
Yes, we are. That's part of the attrition carryover calculation that BNR performs each month.
Thank you.
So, Vice Mayor, if I could, thank you, Mike, for that. We lost 402 officers in 15 and 16. I'm sorry,
Sorry, what was your number again?
402.
Okay. This is the projected hiring outlook for fiscal year 17-18. Again, looking at the original budgeted positions, factoring in additional positions that have been added by BNR and our final expected number that we intend to hire. The bottom table shows the calculation on how we account for the approximately 15 positions per month and how that factors into the total hiring attrition for that year. This is the actual overview of the police department data. This shows the last 3 decades worth of information as it relates to the specific demographic categories within the department. And this slide is important to us because it actually reflects the demographics of the current recruits and laterals that have been hired as of the end of February the 27th. A couple things that's important to note that we have seen a 0.1% uptick in both our African American and Native American communities in terms of the number of officers that have been hired. And we continue to see an increase in the number of our female officers that are hired. We're currently at 18.5%. So we are well above the demographics of our current sworn department number. In terms of the recruitment events, over the past 12 months, Phoenix Police has done at least 15 events with the African American community, and we also continue to reach out to our historically black colleges and universities as well. And some of the 4 that we've already reached out to are listed here above, in addition to others that we continue to add to that list each month. In terms of our other demographics, we've conducted 4 recruiting events with the Hispanic community, 8 with the Asian community, and 3 with the Native American community. The Native American community was one that was of interest during one of our previous sessions. And in order to continue to increase the number of recruiting from that demographic, our team continues to partner with our Community Relations Bureau. They have the Native American Community Advisory Board liaison that works with us and helps us to maintain situational awareness on events that are taking place within that community, and it also identifies opportunities for us to be able to bring recruiters to those events to remain engaged with them as well. We utilize print publication to reach that community, including the 3 that are listed here. And it's also important to note that Class 498 has 2 Native American female recruits, while Class 501 that just started this past Monday has 2 additional Native American male recruits. The police department continues to actively conduct events, recruitment events, to attract female applicants to the department. As we mentioned earlier, we're currently at 18.5% of the folks that we've hired have been females. And of the total of 520 since we resumed hiring in March of 15, 96 of them have been females. This was one of the events that our recruiting team participated in here recently in January of this year. This was a Santan trail run, and this was a very, it was more of a women's recruiting event, and we had a very strong presence at this particular event. With regard to recruitment of our veterans, this is one area that we continue to maintain a strong presence in. Again, of the 520 total folks that have been hired since we resumed hiring, we continue to hold steady at 32% of all of our police recruits are past military veterans. And in the past 12 months, we've conducted 16 different recruitment events to attract that particular demographic. With regard to the out-of-state recruitment, at this point, I would like to thank Budget and Research, the City Manager's Office, and also this Public Safety Subcommittee for bringing this issue to light. We have been successful in our efforts to secure funding, which will provide for at least 6 out-of-state recruiting trips that will take place prior to the expiration of this fiscal year. These trips are going to include at least one HBCU, community colleges and universities that support criminal justice programs, as well as neighboring military bases. And our effort is to try and leverage the travel budget dollars as far as we can by trying to hit multiple venues that are close by so that we can hit 2 or 3 at once. The applicant origination is something that we're going to be tracking, so that will help us determine which venues are going to be the best ones for hiring for us for future budgeting purposes. And we're also going to be looking at capturing this information during the survey tool that we have in place that's administered at the start of the written exam. Too far ahead there. Okay, with regard to our department's lateral policy, we've made some adjustments in order to remain competitive with the other Valley agencies. Hiring of lateral officers has a significant benefit for us here locally because of the previous experience and the compressed time it takes to get them available to take calls on the street. A couple of things that we've done is that we have adjusted our policy so that Arizona Post certified officers that have less than 1 year of experience can now apply. When we redid our messaging and our digital footprint with that, our Facebook message reached nearly 3,000 people within its first 24 hours, which shows us that we're reaching a new demographic that we had previously been cut off of because of our existing policy. Again, we've also implemented a hiring review committee that allows for a multi-level review process of all of our lateral applicants, both in-state and out-of-state.
Now, if you are transferred over, do you lose seniority, or I know that the badge number is something very important for police officers, right?
It is, but it would not apply if you come to if you change agencies. If you were to go from one Valley agency to another, you would be issued a new number. But what it does offer us is that for, say, our in-state laterals that have less than 1 year of experience, they will still go into a field training program, but we've increased that training program from 8 to 16 weeks so that we ensure that we have the appropriate amount of time to vet through and assess that particular applicant's credentials and make sure that they're comfortable doing the job in our agency.
On the benefits part, they still keep the benefit of their seniority the year they start, or would they go back to
They would not have any seniority with our agency. They would start over.
Or how about the benefit wise where it comes to a pension or so? Do they keep that, or does
I believe that
they
still
start from-
contributes to the years of service through the state pension system, but I'm not 100% sure.
We can get back to you on that. I'll contact Nina.
Mr. Chairman, also within the last year, we made an adjustment in our policy on the pay scale. So depending on how many years of experience you're bringing, we floated where you would enter. So we don't have an expectation that everybody comes in at the bottom. They'll come in up in the range.
I'm going to relate this to a world that I'm familiar with, but it sounds very familiar. It's like teachers. Teachers are in high demand right now. Same way police officers. The situation that teachers are in is that they leave one school district and they have gotten their 5 years of seniority. It is very difficult for them then to jump to another district because then they start all over from the very beginning. And even though the pay is probably better of them to move, they won't do it because of their seniority, because of the way the system works out. So we have, I would say, in the future, maybe to figure that out so that we are attractive enough to at least those, and I know the school systems are trying to figure it out, but where it's attractive enough, at least you get your steps. Say you've been with another system for 5 years, you at least get your 5 steps or your ranks, however it works, that they can literally laterally move over. I don't know if that makes sense. It's seniority, it's wages, it's all of it. It's all of it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, for that suggestion. What we provide, as compared to some other agencies, are opportunities to transfer to different assignments where some other agencies don't. So there's some attraction to Phoenix anyway, just because of our size and the ability to move around. But that's something that we can look at. Part of that dynamic could be how equitable is that to some of the people who decided to start with Phoenix PD and to stay with Phoenix PD. So I think Mr. Dohoney mentioned the pay. That's a big deal for them not to start at the bottom of the scale. They start up above that. But we also provide opportunities and transfer opportunities that some other agencies just don't have.
Yeah. I mean, we just have to become very competitive like the other cities. I mean, some of them are offering housing or bonus. I don't know exactly all the verbiage, but we just need to become competitive.
Exactly.
Thank you.
We wanted to share a couple of highlights and things that we noticed as a result of the classes that we've been putting together, and a couple points of interest that popped out for us here with regard to Class 499. This is the class that began January 3rd, and we had 30 Phoenix recruits that started. This class was a bit of an anomaly for us because of those 30 recruits, 40% were female. And this was the largest number of female recruits we've had in one class, at least since we began hiring again back in March of 2015. The rest of the makeup of that class included 6 recruits that were lateral hires from other agencies, 2 recruits that were former police explorers that have worked their way up through our system, and then the age range for this class was between 20 and 40 years old, which is right in our target demographic that we look at for recruiting purposes as well. And the majority of these folks that pursued Phoenix PD had indicated that this was the only agency that they applied for or that it was their preferred agency of choice. We also want to take a look at some of our best practices to see what's working and what's not. And by taking a look at the recent written exam surveys, we found out that 49.8% of all of the folks that took the test gathered their information and did so by way of the internet. And then the second most popular being through employee or recruitment, active recruitment from our officers. The Phoenix Police Department is really trying to improve and create a progressive approach in its hiring effort. And a couple of the things that we've done to address that is that we've actually created an accelerated hiring program for veteran officers who are applying from out of state. What we've been able to do by doing some pre-screening, we've been able to limit the number of trips that they have to make to Phoenix to go through the testing process, which is quite extensive, from 3 trips to as little as 2, which helps us tremendously. We've also been able to secure the marketing and advertising services of On Advertising to help administer and oversee the advertising strategy campaign that we've launched this week. One of the benefits to this selection is that On Advertising, being a local downtown company, also has more than 15 years of experience working specifically with law enforcement, military, and with municipal cities that are looking to recruit. And then one of the other things that we've really tried to work hard at is salvaging recruit hires that are unable to successfully complete the academy. The department has recognized early on that there's a significant investment in these people to get them to this level of this stage of their training, and for them simply to just walk out the door with all of that training and experience that they've gathered to that point was a tremendous loss for us. One of the things that we try to do is identify and work with our other city departments and work units who may have specific needs, where we can then attempt to try to right-size the skill sets of this particular applicant in order to put them in a position to be successful elsewhere within the city. So we can at least retain that skill here within the city rather than it going somewhere else.
So members of the subcommittee, just in closing before we take questions and answers, in looking at efficiencies for our department, we're looking at civilianization of certain positions. Centralized booking would be one of them, but the biggest one we think we can have the quickest bang for our buck, if you will, is in hiring police assistants to take lower level calls. It was mentioned earlier during public comment how long it takes us to get to some calls for service, and having someone show up in uniform is critically important to our community members, but doesn't necessarily have to be this uniform. So we're working with BNR, working with the city manager's office to address that by adding some police assistant positions in upwards of 14, which really equates to a squad of police officers that are able to take priority calls for service. Can't say that this is a savings, but we're definitely saying that it's an efficiency savings and issue for our city. But we need to make sure that we properly share this with our public so that there's not a gap in the expectation of whether or not we're getting premium service versus lesser service. So what we're looking at doing is making sure these police assistants can get to those calls faster, take those reports faster, so that the men and women who wear badges and guns can get to priority calls faster also.
Councilmember Williams.
What kind of training would you give them?
So it kind of depends. We already have police assistants anyway, so they would wear uniforms. They don't have to go through a police academy. They don't carry guns. They don't have tasers. Just basic formatting of how to type in information to RMS system. Probably some training and making sure that you can get on the radio and know what the radio codes are and some other things. But it will be minimal training, and we do have some assistants out there already, so we would just increase that to make sure that we can put our first responders back on the street.
Any other Councilmember Gallegos?
Thank you. Could you give us an example? You talked about salvaging people who didn't go through the full academy process. Could you give us an example?
Absolutely. We have some folks that may make it to a certain week within the academy, and when they do get dismissed from the academy, rather than separate them, again, we try to identify openings that may be available. Some of the ones that we've been able to identify are our communications 911 dispatcher positions that are in the process of an ongoing recruitment effort. And so what we're able to do is our folks are able to help get them on the city's eligibility list for those particular positions, and then we're able to allow them to go down and go through the interview and selection process for those positions to see if they're well suited for that. We've been very successful in putting some of the folks in those positions. We also have our code enforcement positions, or when they're available, other police assistant positions or other civilian positions within the city. What we do is just try to help point them in that right direction and make sure that they go through the proper steps to get on the current eligibility list that's specific to that assignment, so that they can then go through the selection process.
Wonderful. So we're cognizant of why they left the academy when we try to direct them to the right fit. As we're recruiting, it seems like technology is becoming increasingly important in all occupations, but including policing. And if you watched the news this week, probably hacking and cybercrime might be on people's mind. We've had some sobering data at this committee about how many crimes against children involve the internet. Do we need to make special efforts to make sure we recruit officers who are interested in technology?
Well, I think that's one of the things we are seeing on its own, as the new recruits come through, I mean,
Yes,
most
they're
of
all
them,
coming off the
most of them
internet.
are very, very technically savvy, much more so oftentimes than our instructors when we start. But what we do during our pre-academy, it gives us an opportunity to engage with those folks and talk to them. And one of the things that we ask them, is how, why did you select Phoenix? What brought you to us? For us, it's important to know, but it also helps us to try and determine what some of the backgrounds are. And we have such diverse professional and educational backgrounds of our folks that are coming through that we are seeing that a large sector of them, especially those coming from the private sector, already have technology backgrounds. So that's certainly promising for us, and we encourage that.
That's wonderful. In talking to some officers, some of assignments like record management system has not been everyone's favorite assignment, although there are some who do cherish the opportunity. But it would be great if we had people in those positions who really enjoy them, and if we had officers in other positions who are the right fit for those as well. And congratulations on the Native American representation. I would guess that puts us in a lead compared with peer agencies, and I think the three of us on the left are the 3 council districts that have the largest Native American populations. So that'll be meaningful for our constituents. In talking to some of my constituents, I get a lot of questions when I say, we're hiring, please apply to Phoenix, you live in Phoenix. I get a lot of questions about if AZ Post is ever going to look at the marijuana standards again, and I don't know how to answer. But I've heard, particularly from young people in my community, that they have used marijuana sufficiently recently that they are no longer eligible to apply.
Councilwoman Gallego, that will definitely be Arizona Post call. I've met with, in passing, the director, and he hasn't mentioned that, but I do have a couple meetings scheduled with him. So if that's a topic of conversation, we can get that information back to you.
And I have not looked into great detail into why we set the time lengths that we did, but that's certainly something when I talk to people about applying, they say, I made a mistake and I'm no longer eligible. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
In the police assistant position, is that going to be very competitive in pay? Or how does that?
Most all of the assignments are a demotion for the police recruit, so it would be a step down. But it depends on the assignment that they're testing for. Some of the ones that are more competitive or more similar would be like a communications operator, has a different pay range, but the pay ranges are going to vary for all of the positions depending on which one they apply for.
So I actually think you're talking about the 14 police assistants that we're
Right.
talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
So,
sorry.
So no, that's okay. Brian is in higher mode, man. We need people. So to answer that question, we're working with BNR on the rate of pay to make it competitive. But what we really want to operate and talk about is having someone who's going to come in and help the heroes and be one of the heroes in the community too. And that'll be our push and our focus. But I'll talk to BNR to make sure that that's the case.
And then my other question is, what vehicle would they use to, a police vehicle? I'm confused as to what vehicle would they use. They're going to need, if we're going to present them out as helping our heroes, and they're wearing, I'm assuming, a uniform?
So they will wear a uniform. It's not this same uniform. They'll have patches, so they will be readily identifiable as someone who's going to take a report. They will not drive police cars, but they would drive perhaps police trucks.
Okay.
Or trucks that identify them as a police employee, but not a police officer. But that's part of the marketing strategy to make sure, once again, that the public is aware that this person is there to help and take the report. But that's on us to properly market that.
Okay. All right. Just very curious. Looking at slide 3, and it says total hiring is $399 for 2018. But then I look at the hiring grid on page 2, and it says total hiring 17-18 $259.
Correct.
There's I'm missing 140.
The numbers that are put into slide 2, that was the projection that was originally put together by BNR when they built this plan. However, as mentioned earlier, BNR continues to make adjustments to the number of positions that they give us. If you look at the top of slide 3, where it looks at general fund additional hiring, and there's the number 71 there. Up until that point that this report was created, that was the number of additional positions that we had received. And then we also look at the number below it. We're anticipating that they're going to give us another 40 before the end of the fiscal year. And then the other 100 that you're referring to is what we estimate is going to be required to hire above in order to account for the attrition carryover. That's the number of folks that are leaving the organization.
So as we continue to fill classes and people leave, BNR is giving us more positions to make sure that we can get to or closer to filling the vacancies that we have, Vice Mayor.
Okay, so we're anticipating then, I just want to get clear, 2017, 2018, are we hiring 399 officers, or are we hiring 259?
No, we're expecting to hire just under 400,
Okay.
399.
And then the attrition right here, the 180,
Yes.
are we losing those positions, or are we hiring for those positions?
Those are positions that during the next fiscal year we would expect to lose over the course of the entire fiscal year.
But we're not losing those positions. So as those positions leave, we're going to go back to BNR, and BNR is going to hopefully, knock on wood, give us those positions to fill. So we're not losing the positions. We're losing the bodies because they're retiring and or leaving.
Right, so then there's a possibility we could hire 579 officers in 2017, 2018?
No, I believe that's going to be closer to about 400.
399.
So then we are losing these positions. What I mean by that is, we're losing bodies, and I let me see how I'm going to explain this.
So the number of people
There's
allocated.
there's 180 positions allocated. There's 180 police officers in those positions. As 2017, 2018 ends, there will be no longer 180 physical bodies in those positions. I am asking, are we replacing those people, once they leave those positions, are we replacing them with a new body?
That is the goal. The goal is
A
to
new
replace
position.
them with new bodies. Yes.
Okay, so we will continue to have those 180 positions.
Yes.
Okay, so then it would be, because I added up the 399 plus the 180, it's 5 something.
So if we're able to keep up the trend, and if we're able to hire, and we're even looking at having 2 sessions of an academy class, so we're prepping for the opportunity to be able to fill those and be able to manage that as an agency.
Okay. So there is the possibility. I'm not going to say that we are, where I'm just going to say there is the possibility to reach that level.
Anything is possible.
Oh, that's a great answer, Chief. I'm going to use that one.
I was curious, but I think you just answered it for me, because I think one of the comments that came up from Plea was the fact that the small academy classes, and if you're going to have, hopefully, that many going through the process next year, how do you manage that? I mean, you're talking, what, 30, 40
Would love
people in a class?
Councilwoman Williams to have the opportunity to have that problem. We've actually discussed it with the training bureau, and they're fully prepped and ready to have a shift 2 academy. So we would run a shift 1 and a shift 2 academy. We're hopeful to have that problem.
So, Chief, I've been out there in the community, and sometimes I bump into some of our retired police officers. They're saying that they would love to come on part-time and help out in any way. Is there a way that we can actually use those retired police officers to come in and maybe fill in those 14 spots that they already have the experience? They want to get away from their honeydews at home, and they would love to come back to work, maybe part-time.
So, Councilman Nowakowski, thank you for that question. We've looked at the logistics of that, making sure we don't violate any type of pension rules and other things. And if people are willing to come back, they could come back and work. But part of our desire to have those retirees come back and work is really utilize that skill set that they have, either in investigations or other things. I don't know if many of them would want to be police assistants.
Right.
But there are other opportunities for them to get involved, and we're really pushing hard, by the way, on our reserve program too, trying to reach out to those employees who want to come back and serve. So we're looking into that dynamic just to make sure legally we can do it, and we've talked to HR also.
And one of the things I know that all of my colleagues, we go out there in the community and we're hearing from the community that they want more officers, and if there's anything that we can do as a council to make sure that happens. And I mean, that's why we're really pushing to hire all these police officers and trying to get to that 3,100 spot. My thing is, how do we go out there and we recruit police officers from, maybe even our military bases? I mean, that seems like a natural recruitment tool that individuals that are retiring from the military would be already trained and probably fit to become officers. We should be really aggressive going out maybe to those military bases, and I know that we're looking at community colleges and universities, but I mean.
So that's definitely, Councilman Nowakowski, Mr. Chair, that's part of the out-of-state recruitment strategy. So when we go to those regions, we're hoping to hit a core group of military bases to get those military numbers. And Brian had a slide up there that talked about our success rate with folks who've come from the military, and upwards of 40, 30 something, 40%. So we understand that dynamic, and that's definitely where we're going also.
And I think that what the Vice Mayor was talking about is those individuals that are retiring, that we've allocated so many slots for new positions, and we just want to make sure that those retired positions are going to be kept intact, and that we're not using the new numbers to fill in the retirement spots. And I think that right now it's just, there's a shortage out there, and I know that we heard from Plea that they're talking about a crisis, and we're hearing it out in the community, even though sometimes the numbers are down, and it seems like crime is down also, but I think it's because we're working our police officers hard, and they're out there in the community, they're involved in the community, and I like that community policing that's out there, and the connection that they have out there. And I just want to make sure that if we allocated spots, that we fill in every single spot that we can, and try to find other revenues to fulfill even more spots out there in the future. And thank you for your efforts. Any other comments? Thank you, Chief. Item number 10. We're talking about secondhand dealers.
All by yourself, Mary. I know, I saw that.
Good morning, Chairman and Public Safety Subcommittee members. I'm Mary Roberts, I'm Investigations Chief, and I brought with me today Sergeant Jeff Chapman, who's an investigative supervisor who deals directly with this topic of secondhand dealers. And this amendment process included different members, stakeholders from the wireless community. It involved members from our city licensing department, also our legal department, and of course the police department. And I brought Sergeant Jeff Chapman because he was directly and actively involved in this entire process, and he could provide the detailed information.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Vice Mayor, Council, thank you for seeing us today and your time. The amendment to Phoenix City Code Chapter 19 deals with secondhand dealers. This specific issue has to deal with wireless phones. The wireless phone carriers within the city has asked to be exempt from the secondhand dealer laws because their business model wasn't necessarily to buy regular phones off the street. It was to exchange for business. So what we've worked with them and through legal and came up with a exemption that would fit everybody's needs. This exemption requires that there is no cash given out. It's only store credit. They have to have access to the contracts and to the information available to the wireless community or carriers. And Yes, the related manufacturers. So we sent out 430 notices to the secondhand carriers, dealers within the city of Phoenix, and also 13 members of the industry, explaining what the requirements are for this new ordinance exemption, and we had not received any opposition from that stakeholder group. And that's about it. It's pretty simple.
Councilmember Williams?
This seems totally reasonable and applicable, and I would move approval.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any comments? My comment would just be, if you go to a park and swap or you go to a mall and they have those little kiosks and you have an iPhone or a wireless device, how do you know if it's stolen or not? And would the wireless company actually trace that when you trace that back to who owned that phone once you try to put it back online or so?
Well, in this particular issue, you're talking the main manufacturers, not a third-party group like a kiosk or one of these other types. So they would not be dealing with a phone that they would not notice that right away that you are the person that was on that contract and already had that service, and you're just changing companies. Okay. What you're talking about there is they are required as a secondhand dealer to report to us. We run the serial numbers and stuff, and that's how we find out if they're stolen.
So basically, those individuals should have a secondhand dealer's license?
That's correct. And we deal with swap meets and auctions and the whole gambit.
Alrighty, thank you. Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. We're on item number 11, department budget update. This is a portion where we talk about all the savings that we've had in all of our different departments.
Or something close to that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. My name's Lisa Lagaki, and I'm the Department Budget Supervisor at the Police Department, so I'll be doing the budget update today. And this is through January of 2017. Our budget, thank you. Our budget for 16-17 is $612 million. And to date, we've spent $355 million. We're at 58% spent, which is where we should be on budget at January. Moving to the next slide, the monthly expenditures. Our expenditures for January are a little bit higher than they were for January last fiscal year. A couple reasons for that is we paid our TASER payment in January of this year. Last year, we didn't pay it until February. We had a correction in January for our overhead for aviation, and that was $3.7 million that we put in there. We had $1.7 million additional sworn pension costs, and we also had a jail payment in January that last year we didn't make until February. So that explains the increase between the 2 years. Our cumulative expenditures, again, our top 10 tend to be mostly the personal services. A couple things to point out. The jail services is higher this year than last because we had made 6 payments so far in 16-17. Last year we had only made 5 payments at the same time. And then the sworn clothing allowance is higher, and that's due to the concession restorations for this year. Our revenues collected, in our grants, we received the reimbursement for the COPS 2015 hiring grant. So that makes the difference between 16-17 and 15-16 for January. And then our other revenues are pretty consistent throughout compared to what they were last year. And that's all I have to present. Do you have any questions?
Any questions? Councilmember Gallego?
This one's probably more for the chief than, we have a new transition at the sheriff's office, and they're looking at their jail process and how they're gonna manage that. Are we part of that conversation, since it's a significant cost and important partner to us?
Chairman Nowakowski and Councilwoman Gallego, if I understand your question, do they consult us with regard to their rates, or?
They keep going up.
We wish they did, but
Okay.
they don't. They set the rates annually, and we pay that rate.
Thank you. Not surprising, but not the answer I was hoping. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. Go to fire.
Okay, Councilman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee, I'm Ken Lake. I'm here to present for fire's budget. So as today, at 66% of the year gone, we've spent about 56% of the budget, which is pretty much on track with where we expected. In comparing this year to last year, we saw a 4.9% increase, and again, it's pretty consistent. Our budget was almost 5% more than last year, so we're running pretty much on track there. And then looking at the top 10 expenditures, much like the police department, ours are definitely significantly personal services. The salaries are a little bit down. I think that was explained, though, because we took the pension cost out, which made up the difference for that. Running down the line, our equipment management charges are slightly up. That has a little bit to do with our fleet and the condition that it's in, just maintaining those. And then lastly, motor vehicles. Is because we purchased a ladder truck and an engine as well. But other than that, we're pretty consistent with what we expect. Holiday fire, it's just the amount we pay out for holiday pay. Yeah. So and then revenues, we're a little bit down in terms of ambulance transports, but that's not really indicative of the entire year. We're expecting to be right on track. It's just how the start of the year started in relation to last year. Other than that, the dispatch fees and dispatch maintenance are 100% cost recovery, so we expect those to be right on target with what we expected. So certainly take any questions if you have any.
Any questions for my colleagues? Thank you so much. We'll go to the courts.
Good morning, Chairman Nowakowski, subcommittee members. I'm Will Gonzalez with the Municipal Court. And as you can see from our year-to-date, 8 months into it, we're at 55.87, so we're on track toward a $28 million budget. As you go to the monthly, year after year, year over year, the variance of that total is at 3.09%. So we're coming in exactly where we think we'll be. And then as you look at the top 10 of the expenditures, 3 of those, the top 3 are basically personnel costs. And that's how it's been year after year pretty much, and that's pretty much consistent. And then as for revenues, as you look at the revenues, you will see there's the trend down that continues. That is a national issue, as has been mentioned to you, as to citations coming in and the like. You have about a 14% drop from last year, 22% drop in civil citations. And again, that's a national trend. It is not unique to Phoenix itself. But with all that, we can also let you know our current CAP numbers, the program that the City of Phoenix Municipal Court had divined. We have over 13,000 participants now into that program. And of that, what that means to the city is about, so far, we've hit the $7 million mark. And of that, 3.6 the city retains. And that's basically 13,000 people who are being restored, their ability to get their driver's license and the like. And now we have just, we were informed last week or 2 weeks ago, the city of Tucson has adopted the model. And the city of Glendale has the model. And so not only has the City of Phoenix Municipal Court created a program that helps our residents and the like, Other cities now have looked at the value propositions that it offers to its residents and has now adopted the same program. And with that, I'll open for any questions.
I just wonder if we're getting royalties on those.
We have not trademarked this or patented it, so no.
Councilmember Williams?
You talk about the citations being down. Are the number of court cases down in total? And if so, do we still need that full complement of staff?
Well, it just depends on what we're speaking of. Civil citations are definitely down, so you're going to have less cases coming into the system. Criminal, there has been a bit of a tick up on property crimes and the like. It's consistent with what the police have shown in their stats. But if you're looking at a 10-year trend, certainly nationally, you've seen the trend going down from a crime. So we're a misdemeanor court, not a felony court. So violent crimes would not be, talking about murder and the like, would not be in our system. But you're still averaging the same amount. If you're looking at domestic violence, you're still at the same service calls. There still tends to be the continuing issues in the misdemeanor courts and the criminal side. That's still out there. So it's not just the civil citation, but you're also looking at the criminal side. So from a staffing standpoint, we still have a lot of vacancies that we've trying to fill. And we're still trying to go through that process of hiring people into the court so we can meet our demands as they go. Now, what they've been predicting out is that when this national trend changes, it'll change fast. And so we're trying to get ahead of the curve. And so being smart, as our presiding judge has said, in some of how we handle our cases is going to assist us. You heard the behavioral health court and that trend of really being smart. For us, justice through excellence, that also means to be excellent, to create that product of when people walk out with dignity and they understand they've been heard is part of the process of what we look for in our employees as well.
I know you have one of the best courts probably in the nation, so
We have
a compliment.
Well, we really
staff.
appreciate that. We have the requisite leadership that really is really looking down the road to say, how can we not just be a municipal court, but be the municipal court?
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
I just wanted to say thank you, but I also wanted to say that we lost a member of our family, and it was Crystal Rosanico. And I did not personally know her, but she became one of my sheroes. And she became one of my sheroes that day was because of her comeback story and her resilience and her strength and the fighter that she had. And I left the funeral reinvigorated because of all the things that she did for the fire department and also paving the way for women in those non-traditional jobs, and how she was able to make a huge impact in opening the doors, but also, and I'm just going to say this, also being able to be part of the men's club, I would say, and be able to hold her own. So I just wanted to say that that's what happened to me last week and the impact that she had. And so I just wanted to say it because all of you are a part of public safety and make huge impacts within our community and within people's lives. So thank you.
Any other comments? I just really want to thank you all for being good stewards, and this is something so important that on a monthly basis where it's a check and balance that we as council members can actually see where you're at and making sure that we're keeping within the budget. It also gives us data to find out that how budgets are affected by staff members also. I believe that there's a lack of police officers giving out citations and all that. That affects also the court system in the long run. So it all intertwines, and I think that when you look at it as a whole, that we all work together and it's one team. It's that Team Phoenix approach. So thank you so much. Alrighty, we're on call to the public. Seeing that there's no cards, we're at future agenda items. Any future agenda items? With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.